make sure that those people who are not with us for today can also share in this information in the sharing session. So just very briefly, ASSITEJ South Africa has been holding these 1-hour sharing sessions for people working in arts education. This is our third one today. It's been really rich to hear about the work that has been happening, really exciting to see how people are adapting to the present time and to the challenges of COVID-19 and all the ramifications of that, but also just to hear about the very inspiring work that people are doing. So hopefully today we're going to have 2 presentations. Ruth is still joining, which I'm a little bit concerned about, but the first one will be from ASSITEJ South Africa, and it's our Kickstarter empowerment program, and Ali will be presenting on that, and Chulufelo as well, if yes, she's back in the room with us. And then we've also got 1 or 2 of the team for Kickstarter here, so they may also chip in and say a few things. So we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to talk about the Imbali Visual Literacy Project, which is Ruth Sack's organization, and she's the person who is struggling to enter right now. And she'll be telling us about the work that they've been doing and their very beautiful resources that have been created. So over to you, Ali.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to screen share. Oh, wait, I can't. Yvette, can you let me?
Yes.
Okay. Are we all seeing that? Oh, wait, that's the last, sorry. Okay, can everyone see and hear me? Excellent.
Yes.
Thank you. So I said it earlier, but I'll say it again. I was the project manager for Kickstarter, particularly in the project pilot days. But since then, Tembile and Solo have really taken over for me, particularly while I was away in the UK. So they're on the call today too, and I would love them to jump in at any time to give their insights to managing the project. And we also have a few of the Kickstarter facilitators who really work on the ground. So I feel that they are really the experts. So if they at any point want to share, I invite them to add their voices to the presentation. So I think we are all in the room quite aware of the educational context that exists in South Africa currently. And I think these 2 images on the bottom of the slide sum it up quite well. You know, we have a private kind of school environment which has amazing resources, beautiful classrooms, high walls, and then we have contexts like the image on the left, which is children working under a tree with a blackboard. And so what is amazing about the South African policy is that our policies, particularly for arts education, are some of the most amazing in the world. So we actually have an arts curriculum which is compulsory for learners throughout the school career, or at least up to the FET phase, and in the FET phase it is optional, but obviously we have infrastructure lacking, as we can see on the image on the left. And what we don't have is very skilled, trained teachers available to implement the supportive arts policy. And this is really a throwback to apartheid days and to lack of training now at tertiary institutes. And what we also really know as arts practitioners is the impact that the arts can make in the lives of learners. So these are a few points, which is from the MacArthur Foundation's Champions of Change project, which really looked at the impact the arts make for learners in art subjects, but also outside art subjects. So that basically the arts are able to connect learners, the arts transform environments, the arts connect learning experiences to the outside world. So this was a project that looked at schools which had arts and schools which didn't. And it really, really showed quite a powerful impact for schools which had arts and which advocates for the arts. So I'm going to go on to this slide, which shows very clearly in a scale the impact that art subjects really do make. So obviously at schools, you can see where there were art subjects, how it impacted in other subjects such as mathematics, reading, general school sort of behavior. And I've got another slide which I'm going to show now, which speaks to what are sometimes referred to as soft skills, the peer relations, the general self-concept of the learner, and parent relation. And I know that a lot of us in the arts know this. We know how impactful the creative arts and the arts can be in the lives of learners. And what used to happen in the South African context is that if this was presented to education departments or officials, they would say, well, yes, of course that works because it's in a different context. It's in America or it's in Europe, and the context is very different. And a number of years ago, ASSITEJ was lucky enough that Rand Merchant Bank approached us and said, what we want is a case study for the impact of the arts in South Africa. So a South African study which really showcases the difference that the arts can make. And so we were obviously very excited about this. And we kind of designed a case study which would assess for both target and beneficiary groups. So it was a comparison study in schools that had a support program for arts and schools which didn't. Because as I mentioned earlier, the arts are a compulsory part of the school curriculum, but they're often not very successfully implemented in the school. And that's to do with teacher training, really. So at the time, there was another project which was being run by FMB, and that was an intervention in maths literacy and English literacy and school management. And basically, ASSITEJ was able to kind of piggyback that project, but do a project very much for arts in half of those schools. So the PEP project was in the Free State and the KwaZulu-Natal, in the Fazile Derby and Ledwela-Putswa areas in the Free State, and then in KZN, in Umlazi and Gumgunglovo areas. And so basically what ASSITEJ was able to do is to work with half of the schools who were in the larger project. And basically we were then working with a total of 20 schools, 5 from each district. And we were training in the intermediate phase, which is grade 4 to grade 6. And in this phase, the arts are a compulsory part of the school curriculum, but they're sort of housed in life skills. It's quite complicated. So in life skills, there is the creative arts subject, and that includes music, dance, drama, and visual arts, which is quite a load. You know, we think of ourselves as practitioners, perhaps as experts in one of these. But at this level, a teacher is required to be able to teach in all 4, which can be really demanding. And so what we did is we designed a project where we would train artist facilitators in the CAPS curriculum to be able to teach all the subjects, visual arts, dramatic arts, music, and dance, and then to be able to go into the schools and work directly with the teacher in the classroom. And the idea of having the facilitator in the classroom is so that they would work hand in hand with the teacher. So they were not there to take over the lesson. They were there to both learn from the teacher about classroom management, but also to support the teacher with delivering the art subject. And then what we would do is we would have trainings, I think almost once a term, where we would bring the artist facilitator and the teacher into a workshop where we would train for the upcoming term. And the idea is that eventually, after 2 years of training, the teacher would be skilled enough to be able to handle the art subject, and the facilitator could move on to another school. So the idea is that it's creating a sustainability within these areas and making sure that those areas become arts-rich environments, not only the school, but also the district or the area where the school is. And perhaps I must also mention that a lot of these schools were rural or peri-urban schools. So kind of either in very rural kind of areas where they couldn't reach resource-filled environments, or quite isolated. Some of them in KZN are really far out and quite isolated. I have a series of pictures of some of the workshops. This is Pedro Espi Sanchez, who is one of our music facilitators. And the idea of having the workshops was really to take the teachers through the process. So the Kickstarter Creative Arts Project really works with an embodiment kind of process where the teachers are really taken through the process of actually creating dance or creating visual art, so that they have that experience, and then they take that experience and the learnings from that back to the classroom. So this is a dramatic arts lesson with facilitators and teachers working together. Here's a visual arts lesson. And we also really try to encourage our teachers to be using recycled materials. So newspaper, plastic, something which is available and is useful and helpful for them, particularly in the arts subjects. Often one of the struggles that the teachers have is working with the actual materials. What we also do is we provide manuals to all the teachers, which has a step-by-step process, which really helps the teachers when they go back into the classroom to remember the lessons and how to implement those successfully. So when we did the pilot project in 2015 and 2016, we did a series of monitoring and evaluation. We did a baseline assessment initially, and then followed up in 2016 and 2017 around really looking at what the project had achieved over that time. And a lot of this data really showed an improvement of the knowledge of the creative arts subject, and particularly around the CAPS curriculum and understanding what the curriculum meant. And what we also found at a lot of schools is that those teachers had insisted on dedicated arts spaces for the creative arts subjects. So a lot of them were starting to put up art on the walls, and they were including some of the performances and dances that the learners had been creating in the events of the school. So really incorporating it into the school life at parents' evenings or Heritage Day celebrations. And so it was really an opportunity to showcase the work that had been done. So this is just some of the data. In 2015, for example, which is the circle on the left, we can see that hardly any of the teachers had formal training in the art subjects. Obviously, we know that we were able to train them. So in 2016, we didn't ask them if they'd received formal training, but we rather asked them if they had observed a change in their teaching. And 100% of them said yes, that the training had really equipped them to approach the subject in a different way. What the teachers also observed, very interestingly for me and some of my research, was a change in the relationship with their learners, and how they thought that this created a more effective learning environment. And lots of the teachers still to this day talk to me about the sustained relationships they have with the learners who've actually left the schools, but often come back to them or contact them, talk to them about their lives. And how many teachers actually observed a change in their learners through the Creative Arts Project. And some of these changes included things like better peer relations, more respect, more compassion, a curiosity, and better listening skills, discipline as well. And this is a lovely quote I have from a principal in the Free State who talks to how he had observed in the learners the outcome-based approach and how much that really impacted the learners around a sense of goal and outcome. And it's quite a long quote, so I'll just be quiet for a few seconds while you can all read this. And I think this quote really speaks to one of the things that the arts do is that they create a product. And there's a journey to creating that product. And there's very often a step-by-step process. And the principal was obviously observing how this was landing for the learners in that process of, if I want to achieve my goal, I have to take small steps to get there, which really has an impact for their lives and their understanding of achievement outside of the arts classroom. We also found in our monitoring and evaluation that a lot of the teachers were saying they were applying the methodology that we'd used, experience and getting the learners to embody the learning, not only in the art subjects, but often in the other subjects they were teaching, which was quite interesting. That the arts can be a methodology to access other subjects, or can be used across other subjects in the curriculum. And then initially at the end of the pilot project, we had a series of showcases where we brought the schools and the districts together to really look at the work that they had done, and to celebrate, I suppose, the project and the work that had been achieved. And I've got a few photos of that. So some learners dancing, and then some learners performing, doing a piece embodying, the arts and what they had learned. So these are just some of the successes of the project, how many teachers we managed to train in the pilot. What really stood out for me is that some of the teachers were really insisting on only teaching creative arts, and really feeling like the process of doing the arts themselves in the workshops had embodied them to feel like they were artists and that they were creative. And a lot of them described it as discovering their passion, and a side of themselves that they didn't recognize. We saw a lot of schools also setting up arts or drama co-curricular clubs. Some of the schools were extending that to weekends and having children coming in on Saturdays. And then we also had a lot of artist facilitators who really realized that they wanted to teach as full-time, and started working for schools and also going to study more. We had a number of students who then actually went into DFL and applied theatre through kind of doing this process. So after the initial pilot, we were then lucky enough to extend the project into the Northern Cape in 2018, working with 10 schools, which we are very excited about. We also were able to go back to the Free State and KwaZulu-Natal and work with the schools who were not the schools who received the training in the initial case study. So we'd always said to those schools who didn't receive the training as part of the case study comparison that we would come back to them. And then we've also been involved in a project with the education department about writing life skills across all grades using the arts as a methodology. And we're hoping that those textbooks will be published quite soon. So I'd like to hand over to Tsolo now, if she's still with us, just to talk about how we've had to adjust the project now during COVID-19, because obviously we haven't been able to go into schools, and what we've been doing to try keep engaging our facilitators and our schools.
Sorry, Ali, it looks like she's just dropped out. Or...
Tembile, do you want to talk to this a bit?
Yeah, so what we've been doing is during the lockdown, mostly we have been assigning artist facilitators to really look into the lessons that they would have done if they had gone to schools. So what we did is we've collected a number of videos that they have been sending to us. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to compile all these videos and be able to at least send through to teachers, and the teachers can be able to view them either on mobile phones or on their laptops. So the main idea is for the lessons to be accessible to teachers and also to students. And yeah, as of now, we've only covered mostly term 1 and term 2. But recently, artist facilitators, they have also been sending stuff for all the grades, grade 4 to 6, for the whole year. That's where we are right now.
Thank you, Timbile. So obviously there are challenges around trying to shift a training which is so much about embodiment and connection into a sort of online space. But we've been trying to do that, and we hope to be able to edit the material during September and try to get it out to teachers, to keep inspiring them to do the work, but also for the future, so that we can have more of an online source and possibly online training, because obviously who knows what is potentially going to happen and how long COVID will be with us for. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything. Jefferson, if you're still with us, if you want to add anything about your experience being part of Kickstarter.
I just want to say what was amazing for me to work on the project was seeing the change in teachers and see how motivated the teachers became. Because what was nice was in these rural schools where we did the project, there was teachers that was maybe not motivated enough or was not very confident with teaching the creative arts. And after a couple of training, then they became very motivated with teaching it and experience it with, within the classroom self, and them seeing the change that they can make in the lives of children using creative arts. So that was amazing. For instance, I had teachers that told me that they usually struggle with kids that drop out of school, and kids, they did not struggle with them coming back to school or actually motivate them to come back into the classroom. And other teachers at the school that was not teaching creative art, they could also saw the change. So I think that was, for me, that was amazing. And that, for me, personally, for me, that was the reason why I think the program was of utmost importance, is to bring the change about. So yeah, so children really became to have ownership over themselves and over the space. And it was also great to see that other teachers start to be interested in creative arts and visit the creative arts classroom. So that for me was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And perhaps something I didn't mention is that we had teachers feeding back to us that on the days that they had the creative arts classes, the attendance would be better than at other days. And I think that just speaks to the power of the arts and the power of a curriculum being embodied, where learners have their own agency in not only in the type of subject matter, so in dancing, in being creative, but also often with the choice of theme. So the way that our lessons are structured is around, often the learners will create something, and often the choice of what that subject matter is up to them. So they could enact something from their everyday lives, they could choose a theme, and so in a way it's speaking to their lived experience in the world, what they are creating or what they feel they are needing to be reflexive about or unpack or try to understand would be evident in the kind of material that they acted out. And I think that's quite powerful, because the curriculum doesn't give a lot of space for these learners to be able to show their lived experiences of the world. And I think art is a place where that can happen. And in a number of ways, I think through visual art, through music, through dance, and through acting.
Thanks so much, Ali. That was great. And I'm going to hand over to Ruth. Ruth, I'm so happy that you managed to get into the room.
I'm so too. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
And we can.
Nice.
No.
So
the floor is yours. Do you need to share anything on your computer? Or?
I will be sharing, but with the books that I have with me. I haven't yet cracked that next level of screen sharing yet, but I'll get there. But there's a lot here too. So if my image is the biggest one, you should be able to see. Thank you so much. And that was fascinating. And obviously, there are enormous numbers of overlap and commonality between our experiences, because Imbali is, as probably most know, also an art teacher training program. We focus very much on the visual arts, of course, and but we also have, like you, or like the kinds of experiences Alison was describing, we have learnt an enormous amount and adapted and adjusted from the process of working with teachers, mainly in rural areas. We have, especially in recent years, most of the teachers we've trained are across the country and out in the provinces, not only rural, of course, but quite distant places far from the centres. But just to step back one moment, one of the things I'd like to, perhaps let me first say what I'd like to talk about. Firstly, I'd like to focus on this series of resources, these books that we have recently published about 2 years ago, not quite, and what our thinking was in the development of this series of books and how they work, and I'm hoping to end up by focusing on that. But just to give that a context, Imbali is not only a teacher training organization any longer. It's in some 20 years ago, we also went into crafts training. But so we have these two parallel programs with some minimal crossovers, mostly quite independent of each other. But what is common to both is that what we've always felt a central tenet of our approach has been the notion of being hands-on, experiential. I think embodied was the term that Alison was using, that training teachers to teach other people could not happen without teachers themselves going through an extremely immersive creative process themselves. And this has been sort of embedded in the approach of the organization right from 30-something years ago when we began. And so to perhaps talk about the workshops which led up to the development of these books, what we have been doing, certainly for the last 20 years or more, we have been traveling with big vehicles full of artworks, and in the past with art materials, and also with artworks, to these different sort of centers where teachers come together in an area, district, or a part of the province. In the early years of my tenure with Imbali, we had a partnership with MTN, which was extraordinarily productive, because MTN allowed us to take holdings from their art collection, the actual physical artworks, paintings, prints, out into these areas in a little bus, and they allowed us to use them, to engage with them, to have the teachers looking at them at close quarters, touching them even, discussing them, experiencing artworks, South African artworks of high quality at very close quarters. And this was key because on the one hand, our focus is teaching art making and how to work with materials and all of that aspect of things. But the other aspect of Imbali's work is very, very much about looking at art, looking, and it's in our name, the Imbali Visual Literacy Project. It's about looking at, understanding, engaging with, using artworks as a starting point for one's own art processes and ideas. And so, but of course, in the process of working with teachers in all these distant places, we became more than aware that when we packed up our artworks and our art materials and ourselves and left, drove away again, in many cases we were leaving them with a great immersive experience and many ideas, and often art making materials for their classroom, but with very few or no images. We were working in places with no museums, no art galleries within reach, no libraries, no access to images. And that was one of the many sparks behind the production of these books. How we were sort of confronting this problem of how we can leave good images in the hands of teachers, with which we felt it would be extremely difficult for them to teach effectively. So over time, this series of books, which are, as you can see, quite large format books, they are, I don't know if you can see how big they are, they're as large as we could afford to make them. There are now 8 volumes of them, which come in a sturdy box, which I'll show you. They come in this box, and so each book is each book which I will talk about. I won't talk about each of them, but I'll try and talk about specific aspects of some of them, which will, I hope, raise a lot of issues in our approach to teaching about looking. Each of them is very extensively and very, very richly illustrated with artworks on almost every page. Perhaps what I also wanted to say one more thing before I go into more detail is that, as I said, there are 8 in the set, and the 8th one is a teacher's guide, and it talks about many fundamental but very general issues, like how to manage a classroom, how to physically manage a classroom in which you're teaching visual art, how to ask questions, how to ask open-ended questions, how to adjust to a way of teaching and thinking and talking with your learners that is not about a right or wrong answer. How to engage with images in the real world, and how to draw out from learners their own responses and their own sort of personal response to imagery. So the first perhaps big issue we dealt with last week in another webinar, I spoke about how we developed a voice for these books. who was speaking in them, and to whom were the books speaking, and what pitch and what kind of what level of complexity or simplicity or detail or script almost did they need to embody. And that was a very long process, which I won't talk about now because I did before. But the other big thing, the thinking process that we had to go through early on was how to structure these books themselves. Well, what goes into which, and how do we scaffold them, and how do we divide the 8 books, and what would our categorization be? And we decided that we went through a number of possibilities. We looked at art history and at formal art training and at the traditional ways of teaching art, and felt that none of them really fitted. What we wanted was a structure that would talk to learners themselves about, and I think Alison referred to this in her presentation, about how art was really a part of your lives, a part of life, a part of the everyday experience of the world, a part of growing up, a part of dealing with conflict, with gender issues, with our history, with adulthood, and with identity. And ultimately, we chose 7 themes, which I will show you now. The first book is called Getting Started, and it's a book about, well, that one's about the language of art. It's about establishing a vocabulary. It's about looking at how we talk about art, the elements of art. And we decided to look very bravely at abstraction right from the beginning, to dive right into abstraction. But it's a book that talks about color and line, and in a very interactive way. For example, let me just find this. We talk about line as something that lives and moves and is around us and is about energy and emotion and direction and form and space, and sound. The second book, which is called Faces, is also not only about faces, but about personal identity. It's about how you project yourself. As you can see, we use that. So, for example, very early on, we have a page in this book about how we want to be seen by the world, our Facebook profiles, our social media profiles, how we are seen by authority figures. So this page, as you can see, has somebody's identity book, which is already out of date since this book was developed, and it has pictures from her phone and her Facebook page as well, and it talks about who we are, how we want the world to see us, how we are changing sense of self. But the book called Faces is also about portraiture, obviously, and it's about the sort of great iconic portraits and the portraits from the canon of South African art. And as you see, we have tried to make the images as large as possible so that they are, and as beautifully produced as possible. And in every case, there's an enormous amount of information. There are questions, there are projects that arise out of these images. Discussions with artists, artists' own words, the context of the work, what they meant to the artist and what they might mean to you. And we try to keep that. And then, of course, every process of looking leads to a process of making. And we have also, not as much, but almost as much as we foreground the work by these great South African artists in these books, we celebrate the work of learners as well. The work of real learners, just like the learners that we're talking to. On this page, for example, and I'm really describing some details now, but I'll try and move through them quickly. We have two extraordinary oil paintings by Joni Brenner, who used to paint portraits from the backs of people's heads. And we then talk very, very practically to the teacher about how you could set up the same project in your classroom, for example. And there are some results, some of the learners' drawings of the backs of each other's heads. So very often there's a very direct correlation between looking and making, but often not. I will page through some of these. I can't talk about every project, though, much as I'd love to. But very important in this book is the quality of images. We look at African masks, which seems a good idea in a book about faces. And we look at the implications and history and power and spirituality embedded in African masks. But importantly, and as you can see here, we wanted these to be as large and as gorgeously reproduced as possible, so that they feel like the tangible things that they are, so that one feels their power, as you would feel their power in confronting one of them, or holding one of them, or even in a museum. And that project will lead to a mask making project as well. And we then also are very, or felt very conscious of our teachers. Well, I suppose the primary audience of the books are teachers who are not familiar with making things, who might need an enormous amount of guidance and visual stimuli and visual guidance. And so we sort of use text and image to guide you through a process. And finally, here are some of them. And finally, we sort of tried to totally celebrate. This is a huge, enormous photograph, kind of bigger than life size almost, or life size at least. The learners' products, the learners' work, the outcome of these lessons. We move through one of the others. Not sure how much time is. You might have to warn me. Let's take this one. This is a book. So I stopped explaining the themes. The third book is called Bodies. It's a book, obviously, about the human figure, and so there are activities involving drawing and sculpting and even acting and movement. But there's also making human sculptures, which is as close as we get to acting. But it's also a book about work. And it's, sorry, I'm holding this very well. And so we talk about issues that arise around the human figure. So work, social issues, social history, human relations, social relationships in our own history. So it goes, we also talk about, in this book, about gender relations, the processes that adolescents who are our students are going through in relation to their bodies, body image, prejudice. And we've chosen a number of artists who work with those questions. There's a Penny Siopis. And we delve very deeply, in some cases, not every case, we delve very deeply into what the artist was working with, what ideas and what complex sort of concepts and notions they were exploring. So in this famous work by Penny Siopis about, I think it's called Dora and the Other Woman, we take on the question of this painting is about Freud, and it's also about Saartjie Baartman, but it also deals with how certain prejudices become so embedded in our culture that we are not necessarily aware of them as prejudices until our culture, until we can confront them. So ideas that are commonly, this is another work under the same heading. Ideas that are commonly accepted within a culture are challenged by artists. This is a work by Nicholas Flobo, who is challenging the very macho, male-centered culture from which his family arose. And so on, and so on. We also, in this next one, which is called Things, it's a book about how we accumulate things, but also about the way things, objects in our lives acquire meaning. They acquire historical meaning. They acquire ritualistic meaning, spiritual meaning. The way things become embedded with significance in our lives. We try to, and in this book in every book, we try to deal with the elements of art, and this one is about texture. And as you see, we have endeavored to make the book as tactile as possible. So you're almost experiencing the texture. Let me just turn to the page. We also here here's an example. This book is obviously also about still life. The book on Things deals with still life and the history of still life in this country and how it's changed its meaning and changed its message. But it also, in a very visual, very, we hope, accessible way, describes how you, as a teacher, can recreate or set up situations in your own classroom. This is a picture photograph of a class of students drawing a still life, and some of the products their drawings appear around the outside of the page. But we also we also discuss the notion of the class, the art lesson as an artwork, that the art lesson itself is an experience of the art lesson itself is constructed as an artwork. These are some of the images that in which we talk about ritual. Our designer tried, as you can see, very, very successfully often, to break the sort of relationship between image and text that is normally quite a rigid one, and to have image text talking across to each other. And things, and we move a bit more quickly because I can see if I can get so involved in this. Book 5 is about place. It's about places. It's about landscape. It's about the environment. It's about space. It has this beautiful, and most of them have these beautiful fold-out covers to sort of create this sense of an ever enveloping image. This is in this one we look at landscape in all kinds of ways. I mean, numerous ways. This image, which is by Gladys Ngudlandlu, sorry, an extraordinary painting of a mountain in which we as the viewer are placed very, very low down, looking up. And we talk in these questions on the side about how that placing of us makes us feel in relation to the image, how that affects our own sense of self in relation to an image, how we read the image, how we relate to the notion of the land as a result of this image, how it positions us. And conversely, this is a double spread about, it's a painting by Clive van den Berg. And it does almost the opposite. It takes us deep into the earth. The painting, we've made it as large as we could. And I just wish we could have had fold outs in the book. If we could possibly have done that, we would have just made them bigger and bigger and bigger. But this one, which kind of bleeds off the page, is about the earth. It's about the underworld. It's about what this earth under our feet hides, both metaphorically and literally. It's about mining. It's about wealth. It's about death. It's about loss. It's about unearthing. And we've placed it next to two monotypes, also by Clive van den Berg, which almost act as diagrams. They're almost a diagrammatic expression of what happens in this painting. And so we try to place images side by side to talk to each other. We try to set up conversations between the images across the pages. Here again, on the one side, we have an image by Alan Crump about this side, about the wounding of our planet Earth. It's an image of a quarry or at the beginnings of a mine in this extraordinary blood-colored earth, and it talks to an image by an artist from Natal, talking about Judy Jordan, who's talking about construction and the destruction of the environment. And so we tried to, through the book, develop conversations. Let me show you one other here. These are images by Titus Matiani, of course, as you probably all know, and they are two separate ones. They're extremely, enormously long. They're some of them are 30 meters, 25, 30, 35 meters long. So here what we did was, I mean, there's no way of recreating that experience, but here what we did was the designer used the book itself, the physical book, to express the idea of this enormous, or to emphasize this idea of this enormous perspective, this deep sense of its length through this perspective, disappearing into the sort of gutter of the book. These two works, and here she did a similar thing. These are very different, tiny works. This is a concertina book, or a Leporello by Gail Berman, also about the landscape. It's normally a tiny little fold-up book. Again, across the middle of the book, it opens up and it almost pops out, sort of like as close to a pop-up as we can possibly. But the designer is using the structure of the real book to kind of echo that. And similarly, this is an artist's book by Ruth Sack. It's different in that it's actually a little book. You page through it. The pages are translucent, and you can see landscapes kind of emerging through the translucency as if one is moving through them. And again, we try to use the physical book to give that expression to that.
Thank you so much, Ruth. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to just jump in here because we're supposed to be finishing at 4 and it's already 7 minutes past.
Okay. I'll just tell you what the last books are about. I won't talk about them. So the book 6 is called War Zones. It's a book about our own conflictual history in this country and how artists responded to that. It's also a book about other kinds of wars, the war against the war against the HIV virus, the war against power relations within the country, and how art has been used to respond to that. And finally, the last book is called Inner Worlds, and as it suggests, it's a book about the spiritual in art, about dream and imagination, surrealism, and it's a book about the earliest art in South Africa, which is the rock art of the San people. So I'm sorry I went on for too long, but what I was trying to do is actually just convey what physically these books are like and what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful. And what I would really love, I mean, I'm begging a little bit more time from everybody, and I hope that you can spend a few more minutes with us, but I would just love to give people an opportunity to ask some questions while we've got you here, Ruth, and also, of course, questions to the Kickstarter team who we're presenting first of all. So if we can just have a 5 minutes or so of questions. Are there any questions that anyone would like to ask of either Ruth or Ali or the Kickstarter team? Raise your hands. I know, yes, yeah, Glady.
Thank Yeah, I didn't see that it was. Thank you so much for the presentations for today. I'd just like to find out from Ruth the pedagogical underpinnings of your work.
Mm-hmm.
What could you say they are?
What are the pedagogical underpinnings of our work are? Is that the question?
Yes.
Well, our approach to, we have, at the beginning of this process of developing these books, we tried to adhere very closely to the curriculum structures of the time and the kinds of approaches that were embedded in those curricula. And of course, curricula changed. So we eventually abandoned that effort and saw them as sort of resources for teachers to use in whatever kinds of arts education that they're working within. So they are really enrichment and resource books to use within the kinds of teaching that you happen to be working with. But our approach, I would say, is really number one, that the learner is central to the process, or the teacher is central to the process, that we regard the experience of art as coming as a constant conversation between the learner and the teacher and the artwork and the artist, so that it's extremely learner-centered. But having said that, the kinds of skills that are required to extend knowledge and to extend your understanding and to extend your skills base and to shift your perceptions, you know, those skills are embedded throughout the books. Research skills, technical skills. I don't know if that answers your question, but we want to create a kind of an expanding library, I guess, an expanding resource that is applicable in all kinds of ways. As Joni Brenner called it, it's an elastic. It's a resource that is elastic.
Wonderful. Are there any other questions? From Hamish, do you find schools or teachers as individuals have taken up the materials?
That question to me?
I think so.
Well, what I didn't speak about was how we are getting them to schools and individuals. We're actually, for the last 2 years and until the end of February this year, when we obviously had to stop, we have been traveling with the sets of books and delivering them to schools funded by a number of different funders, delivering them to specific schools that are selected for us by the provincial departments of education. And in each case, we run workshops which introduce the books and introduce how to use the books. And the workshops themselves, of course, are very immersive and hands-on. So yes, there is take-up on that level, which is the books are delivered to these schools for free. We have greater difficulty in getting into private schools and other schools because our distribution channels are not highly developed. That's our fault and our problem, I think. But and responses from those have been coming back to us, and they're incredibly positive. Right now, of course, everything is cut off from everyone and everything, so it's difficult to tell.
Are there any questions from anyone for Kickstarter? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. Then what I'd like to do is just say, first of all, thank you to Ruth and Justine for the presentation, and thank you to all the Kickstarter team for your presentation. I hope you found both of those interesting. Certainly, I think, both of them are incredibly valuable arts education engagements. And I wanted to just speak very briefly about two developments which are kind of interlinked, and which I would love to invite you all to be part of. What you may be aware of is ASSITEJ has started these bi-weekly sharing sessions. So we'll do the next one in 2 weeks' time. And in the intervening weeks, we have our I'm for the Arts education meeting on Thursdays for those people who are members of the working group of I'm for the Arts. Anybody can become a member of I'm for the Arts. The membership form is on both the website and the group. And you're very welcome to sign up and join the arts education working group if you're not already a member. But just to say that the arts education working group of I'm for the Arts is working currently on launching a campaign for arts education, and specifically arts education in schools, because we're feeling that right now at this time, with all the disruptions that are happening in schools because of COVID, and the implications for the education system, it's a moment of profound change. And we want to ensure that this change is for the better and that it embeds the arts more deeply in the education system. Ali spoke to some of the ways that ASSITEJ has been working with the arts in schools to try and do that. What we don't want is for the current situation, which, as she described in the challenges at the end of that presentation, to become what we move forward with, in other words, that schools are in fact dropping art subjects, that senior phase, for example, is dropping from 2 art subjects to 1. Many schools are dropping the performing arts completely. In some instances, creative arts is right off the table. And what we are really afraid of is that this could become something that becomes a policy decision eventually. And obviously we don't want that to happen. Now, we believe that through the work of organizations like ASSITEJ, like Imbali, like the ones that we've heard from over the last couple of weeks, from the Outreach Foundation to Forgotten Angle, etc., we have so many examples of really profoundly moving engagements that make a difference to education. That are happening on the ground in this country. And that in fact, the answer is not to be reducing those, but to be engaging with them and to be upscaling them and to be ensuring that the arts as an approach to education is embedded in every school. So this campaign is going to be looking at that. And obviously from an ASSITEJ South Africa point of view, we're going to be very involved in the campaign because that is one of our 4 pillars, is empowering education through the arts. Now, linked to this, at this time, is also an initiative from the creative industries side to drive 4IR. And there is currently a commission, an independent commission, which has been appointed to the president, that has been advising on 4IR, and which has been making links between the creative economy and 4IR, and which has been talking about the need for capacity building for teachers. And they've looked at the entire education system, the entire ecosystem, from early years right through to universities, tertiary and adult education, and how the arts are essential to the creativity and innovation that is needed within a 4th industrial revolution, which is not something which is coming, it's already upon us. So
What is great about what they're proposing is that, in fact, it dovetails beautifully with our arts education campaign. It's all about embedding the arts as a way of learning in schools, because the arts are the one thing that we know can teach the creativity and innovation that is needed for 4IR. So this report that has been presented is about to be made public. And we will be having an engagement with the writers of the commission around the report, and we invite everybody who's part of this group, and obviously the I'm for the Arts Education Working Group as well, to engage, and also all of our ASSITEJ members who maybe can't be here today for this particular engagement. Please become a part of that conversation. I really feel that we are at a crucial moment for arts education in our country, and if we can all pull together across our different disciplines, our different approaches, our different parts of the country that we may work in, if we can consolidate the information that we have generated from the work that we have done, the research that has been done, the practical experiences which we know on the ground work and make a difference for children, I really think that we have an opportunity here to make a lasting difference in education, which would be what this country needs, frankly. So I invite you all to be part of that. Please stay posted. Please don't get irritated by the emails and the WhatsApps that you're probably going to be receiving from us. Please attend the next meetings. If you have thoughts on either the arts education campaign or on arts education and 4IR, please let us know. Let us make sure that you're part of those conversations. You're all invited to the I'm for the Arts education meeting next Thursday afternoon between 3 and 5 on Zoom. If you need the Zoom address, then I'm just going to put our I'm for the Arts email into the chat. So there's the email, imforthearts@gmail.com, very simple. Please just drop a note to say that you would like to get the Zoom link so that you can attend that next week. But we invite all of you to be there. If there are any questions or comments briefly on that, I know we are a little over time and I apologize for keeping you longer than we said, but let me know if there is anything you want to know. Great. Well, then thank you so much, Ruth. Thank you so much, Ali and Tulu, who's no longer with us, and team. And we look forward to seeing you either at I'm for the Arts or back at an ASSITEJ Arts Education meeting in the very near future.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.